Today's News Talk Radio.
I do a lot of streaming radio.
I do a lot of free streaming.
TNTradio.live.
Now, we've covered the pandemic and experimental COVID injections extensively on TNT, both here on this show and in other shows. But we have a new article that's been written by a whistleblower, Hedley REES, about the MHRA and whether they've actually cut corners in bringing this thing to the market so quickly. Well, I'm delighted to have Hedley on the show to talk about the article which he wrote for the Daily Skeptic. Hedley, welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, David. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
No, thank you so much for coming. And it's a very, very important topic with all of the things that we're hearing now. And even the AstraZeneca injections have been withdrawn globally last week. So we know that there's not, there is some problem with these things. And we were always told that they're safe and effective. But here we've got the MHRA, the regulator, seems to have cut some corners in bringing it to the NHS or the market, if you like, in record time. How did they do that? What should they have done properly, and what did they do that was abnormal and that they shouldn't have done? How did they change the process?
Okay, you first have to bear in mind that a medicine, a drug, a sterile injectable, which is what these were, are products. They are products on the market, and every product on the market needs a supply chain to get it there. And it's pointless focusing on science or experiments or anything else if you don't look at the supply chain first. And MHRA has three basic responsibilities. It's to license companies so that they can put drugs on the market. And that is an extensive review process of not just the clinical data and the safety data, but the supply chain data. And what they have to do to achieve that is to make a small quantity of the drug, maybe 10 liters or kilograms, and test that in animal models. And this is what they call non-clinical testing. So this is before you go into humans. Now, typically, by the time you put the supply chain together, remember, these companies, AstraZeneca, don't make these drugs themselves at all. It's all contracted out to other companies.
Right.
So you have to construct the supply chain. You have to get someone to make the starter materials and raw materials, any intermediates involved, and then the active ingredient. Now, the active ingredient for these injections were either the mRNA spike protein or what's known as an adenovirus viral vector. So I won't go into the detail of that, but they have to be tested in animal models first. So that typically takes, by the time the supply chain is put together, you do the testing in animals, reports have to be written, they have to be sent back, they have to be assessed. Typically, and we know this from the US Government Accountability Office, it takes around 3 years to do that, to be sure that the drug is absolutely safe before you go into humans. And if you want to go into humans, you've got to apply for a license to go into humans, to start a phase 1 trial in healthy volunteers. So you don't want to put an unknown substance into a healthy volunteer and find out that you've harmed them or killed them because the proper scrutiny of the supply chain hadn't taken place. So that needs a license as well, called a clinical trial application. And then you go through the 3 phases of clinical trials: trials in healthy volunteers, trials in people who've actually got the condition, and then large pivotal trials before you get an approval. And typically that takes 7 years. So here we've got 10 years. I hear people talking about it takes 10 years to develop a drug, but it doesn't seem to be sinking in unless you realize this is exactly the same as making an aircraft, a Boeing Dreamliner, whatever. It takes about 10 years to do all the prototyping or the wind tunnels, all these things that they have to do. You don't just shoot people up in the air in the plane and say, oh, that's fine, that'll work. So is this making sense, David?
Absolutely. I mean, one of I said a lot when I was in the London Assembly. I asked Sadiq Khan and Sadim Zahawi, who was there for a guest appearance, how can you say that these things are safe and effective when there's no long-term safety data? And I was just laughed at and I was shut down. Nobody wanted me to speak anymore. But to me, that's obvious, having a background in science. But, the fact that they didn't go through the proper 7 years or 10 years, safety process, with phase 0, 1, 2, 3, doesn't that mean that these things are, they shouldn't be under license? And should the companies that then push them through so quickly, should we be able to sue them? I mean, they seem to have some kind of indemnity, which they shouldn't have because they haven't followed every known safety protocol which we've always had.
No, there's no indemnity at all because, you cannot, with a contract, you cannot waive your legal responsibilities. And that's been a complete scam all along. The supply chain is covered by an EU directive that the UK has to stick to because it couldn't sell products into Europe if it didn't stick to the regulations of good manufacturing practice and good distribution practice. And they just drove a coach and horses through that. They ignored vast swathes of it. Otherwise, the thing is, it takes so long to develop a drug because the limiting constraint is the supply chain. By the time you can run a clinical trial in months, you can get recruits onto a clinical trial, run it, and you've got data, you've got clinical data. But you have to use the drug that's been made by the supply chain, and you have to wait years for that. And so, all the regulations have been developed over years to ensure that all the checks and protocols are in place. I know for certain that they suspended inspections of the manufacturers. Now, the companies that manufacture these drugs, and this is crucial to know, is Oxford Biomedica in Cowley in Oxford. I spent 6 months there helping them to get a UK government grant in advanced manufacturing supply chain. That was a £7.1 million grant. And the product being made then went into a drug made by Novartis that was improved in August 2017. And the other company was a company called Wockhardt in one of the Wockhardt sites in Wrexham, which I've also been to. And I can tell you that I'm not making a judgment on their competence, but what I'm saying is I don't know how they could have been inspected by the MHRA physically in the timelines. Because if you look at the press releases, and this is in the article, for Oxford Biomedica, they scaled up, they built a new site, they bought or they leased an old post office building. They scaled up incredibly quickly, far too quick to make sure that facility was properly validated. The validation is crucial because you have, that is determining the absolute safety of the supply chain. So what I would ask is, why haven't the MHRA, why didn't they go at the time physically to those two sites to inspect them? Then they have to write the report. Then they have to remediate any issue, make sure that any issues are remediated, are fixed. And it's impossible to do it in the timescale and the regulations.
Indeed,
The whole process means they've got to do these inspections.
Yeah, look, Hedley, that's I totally agree with you, and your article is really, really good. I'd recommend that everybody reads this article. It's in the Daily Skeptic. It's called MHRA Cut Corners and Dropped Inspections in the COVID Vaccine Supply Chain, Putting the Public at Risk. But the title says it all there. Look, we got some comments. I'm just going to read you some comments from our viewers. Thanks for this. Very it's stimulating some thoughts and debates here. Lord Melbury says, we may not be able to prosecute them for the actual product, but it looks like we may be able to prosecute for misinterpretation of that product, which is fraud. Good point. Jones from Wales. I remember so many saying they were going to wait a bit before having the jab. In the end, they had as soon as they were called up. I guess that's because people were coerced into having it. And Grumpy Old Woman, good name. I took a screenshot of the total adverse events from the UK yellow card system on 27th of January 2022. For AstraZeneca, there were nearly 500,000 adverse events recorded and 1,190 deaths. That was just in the first year. Wow. Incredible. Look, Hedley, we could talk about this for a lot longer, but I got to move on. But thank you so much for joining me on the show. You know, this is an issue that's just going to run and run because so many people have died from these things after these things and have got injuries and adverse health effects, and this should never have happened. So Hedley, thanks for coming on the show again and talking about this, and hopefully this will put more pressure on the powers that be to never do this again, and we need to bring these people to justice. Thanks, Hedley.
Okay,
this is today's
pleasure speaking to you. Take care.
Great to speak to you, Hedley. Thank you. This is today's News Talk, TNT.
I got news.